welcome back to the My Slice of Life podcast with me, Sharon, your Highland host. I really appreciate you spending some time with me this week because I want to bring something to you which I discovered pretty recently. Now hold on just a wee minute, because if you're a regular listener, you'll know I'm always late to the party. I was late to find Mel Robbins, I was late to find Cass from Clutterbug, hell, I was late to find podcasting. So I need to know from you, once you've listened to this episode, if this is just me being late to this particular party, or if the person I'm going to talk about today is new to you too. I'm always late, so I just need you to kind of help me gauge where I am on this. And before we dive in, I do want to remind you that you can send me your ideas for either podcast episodes or whole season topics. Just head to the blog and use the contact form there, or you can leave a comment here on this episode. The only thing I can't really do just now are interviews, and there are a few reasons for that. One is that the idea of that still kind of scares me, but the biggest reason is logistics. I mean, I record this podcast at a table in the living room when I get a quiet moment, and that's how I do this, so I can't really schedule time to have a guest, and I'm not really sure if this is something I should really admit. But if I'm honest, right, like really honest, I'm not even sure how I would go about it. I mean, don't laugh at me, right, but I've never even done a Zoom call or anything like that. I've never done it. So now you know how basic this podcast really is. In fact, I've still got a squeaky chair. Anyway, now, let's crack on. We are halfway through this season, which has the very grand title of Let's Get Productive. And for today's episode, I want to go through 5 productivity principles. But these aren't something I've come up with. I actually found a video on YouTube and it led me to more videos and a book, and they are all by Mark Manson. So all credit for this topic obviously goes to him. Now, if you don't know who I'm talking about, and I've got the sneaky suspicion you do, but for those who are like me, I'll fill you in just a little. Mark Manson is a writer and podcaster. He has a YouTube channel, and as it says on his website, he gives life advice which doesn't suck. It's good, it just doesn't suck. That's what it says, does exactly what it says. What I like about his work, though, is that it's very straightforward. You won't find it laden with all that psychobabble that has you switching off. There's a lot of humour, so you are kept well entertained. I mean, he talks like he's sitting there right in the room with you. And while I can imagine there are some who will find his swearing a bit much, they're just words. So I would suggest they really need to get over that and pay more attention to the actual content. Don't worry about the words or the packaging. The content is really good. And I like to be entertained when I'm getting information. I don't know about you. I do. I like to be entertained at the same time. Now, having said all that, I made a mental agreement with myself that I wouldn't swear on this podcast. In real life, that's different. But I don't know who's going to be hearing this, so I've always tried to be careful. And this isn't really an easy task when you're talking about Mark's work, because he swears pretty much constantly. I mean, personally that doesn't bother me, but I'll be making some minor changes when I tell you his book titles and so on. You'll be able to work them out for yourselves pretty easily. Mark Manson is a New York Times best-selling author, and his books include The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck, change that, and Everything is Fecked, a book about hope. And I'm going to tell you something, I've only managed to listen to one audio book the whole way through. In fact, I finished it last week, and it was Mark Manson's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck. So I highly recommend it. If I got all the way through it, I was delighted. I'm also slowly working through his videos on YouTube, and so far, I have to say I'm really impressed. So I wanted to focus on the 5 productivity principles Mark has come up with. Oh, and do go check out his channel if you don't already know it. There's a ton of information, loads of humour, you won't be disappointed. Subscribe, check out all the stuff that he does. Hell, subscribe to me while you're there. I'm on YouTube as well. We're going to start with Mr. Manson's productivity principle number 1, which is work with your biology, not against it. But this principle, it sounds so simple when you think about it, but many people just never do it. If you're not a morning person, for example, like me, work with that and try to schedule your work around it. I mean, I would say I'm at my most creative around 10 o'clock at night. And it's not unusual for me to be doing research and, taking notes and everything for the podcast. See, between 10 at night and 2 in the morning, that's when I do this kind of work. That's when I do most of it. But we're always told, get up at 5 a.m, do yoga, journaling, go outside, meditate. Well, that just doesn't work for everyone. I tried getting up at 5 a.m. I did it for one day and it nearly killed me. That's not me. 5 o'clock in the morning. Holy hell, some days that's when I'm going to bed. We really need to remember that everyone is different. And what works for me won't necessarily work for you. I mean, you might be thinking 10 o'clock, that's when you start. That's when I'm going to my bed. And Mark also points out it's useful to remember that, you'll probably change as you get older. I know I need less sleep than I used to. And even though I enjoy having that quiet time in the morning, if I can get it, I'm basically a night owl. I might not stay a night owl, and that's okay. I mean, I would actually love to be a morning person. I really would, and maybe one day I will be. But there's 3 of us in this house, and we're all definitely night owls. Now, in the video that I watched, Mark actually notes this change in himself and says he went from being a night owl to becoming a morning person, and he encourages us to, learn to accept these sorts of changes when we notice them and just go with them. Don't worry about it, just go with it. I mean, likewise, if you were always a morning person, but you're finding you're staying up later and you're productive later, go with it. Don't worry about it. Basically, we need to stop fighting our biology. See, when you think about it, we're never told this. You know what I mean? Our whole life goes from get up early for school to get up early for work. Nobody ever asks if it suits you. Does this suit you? Is this how you work? Is this going with your biology? Or are you constantly struggling to fit into some timetable that, I don't know, who came up with this? Society has come up with this. So nobody ever asks, is this okay with you? Does it work? So for the second productivity principle, Mark Manson gives us the minimal viable action. If you caught my last episode about procrastination, this will sound familiar to you. This principle is what Mark's come up with to overcome procrastination. And in his YouTube video he says, and this is a quote, "It's the smallest action that feels completely doable to you in this exact moment." End quote. And the way he goes on to describe it is pretty much the same as breaking down any task into smaller pieces and then just starting with the one you feel you can do. And he gives a reason why this principle works, which I loved, and I really want you to think about this and take it in. Because he said, again, I'm going to give you another wee quote, "Motivation is not just the cause of action, it's also the effect." Again, that is something I've talked about in this season. That simple act of starting, just making that one small move in itself creates more motivation rather than waiting for the motivation before you make a move. And that's so important for us to remember, especially in those difficult days which we all have, when we're feeling overwhelmed and we're finding that starting anything just feels too difficult. We need to remember, once we start, we will be able to keep going. And I've had to remind myself of that quite a lot. Doing this season, it was in my mind to do it for a long time, but there's things coming up quite regularly which I'm finding helpful. So I do genuinely hope that you're getting some useful information out of these episodes, because I'm getting things done. My mental list, my to-do list, I'm actually finding I am more aware, I think, of things I can do to help myself to get the stuff done. So now we come to the third principle of productivity, which is you only improve what you measure. This brings us to some form of goal setting that works for you. And we all know about the SMART system for goal setting. Yeah, measurable is second on the list. So I don't think this is news, but he does bring up an interesting point on this one. The whole idea is that you need to have some way of measuring your progress. So, say you want to answer 5 emails in the morning, you can clearly see when you've done that. If you want to run, say you want to run a mile 3 times a week, You can clearly see when you've done that. At one point, Mark had a goal to write 1,500 words of his book a day. He wanted to do 1,500 words a day, and that's what he was going to do to write his book. And that's also when he spotted a potential flaw with this. Our minds see these numbers and want to see them go up. So within a couple of weeks, he found he was writing any old rubbish just to hit that target. And then he had a huge editing job to deal with to sort it all out. As humans, we are motivated by progress, by seeing the numbers rise. When we're tracking activity, just ask any YouTuber. Trust me, we are really motivated when we see the numbers go up. But he does say that without measuring something, you really aren't likely to see any progress in that area at all. So it's a good tool to use. Just make sure it's working for you and not the other way around. The fourth principle wasn't something I expected to see when talking about productivity. Number 4 is, don't fight your emotions. Leverage them. But you weren't expecting that either, were you? Productivity does not mean being an emotionless robot. We're human. We have emotions, and so Mark tells us to use them to our advantage. He goes on to explain we're excited to work on things we actually like and care about. This in turn, it allows us to deal with setbacks and be more driven when faced with obstacles. Basically, in a nutshell, when you like and care about what you're doing, nothing can stop you. Pretty much. So in a word, passion. No, not that sort of passion. It's not that sort of a podcast, if you don't mind. It's the passion you have about the work that helps you do it. Even for hours on end, day after day, fail after fail, passion drives you to keep going. I've talked about our allotment on here before, but did you know my husband used to love that place as much as I did? Now, hates it. Won't go, just isn't interested. Whereas, I love it. I would be up there every day if I could be. And trust me, I've had more failures than I can count, but I keep going. So what's the difference? Why does he hate it, but I keep going? It's my passion. I love it. We got an allotment 12 years ago now, and it went well until we had problems with a couple of other plot holders. Just stupid stuff. We were moving to a bigger plot, which for some reason they didn't want us to have it, so there was like a whole campaign of hate going on. We had stuff broken in our plot, just really stupid, childish nonsense to try and make us quit and leave. To be honest, it got really stressful. Nobody talked to us eventually. Plenty talked about us and made sure that we knew about that, knew that they were gossiping about us, but I kept going. And I'll keep going until I'm not physically able to anymore, because I love it, and nobody is going to change that. In fact, now I love sharing it with other gardeners on YouTube, and that's what I do now. But my husband just doesn't share that passion, so now he doesn't go there anymore. Mark Manson is so sure passion is a vital key to productivity. He says if you take someone who loves their job, uses no productivity hacks, but is excited by the work, they will always do better than someone who hates their job but has every productivity hack up their sleeve. No contest. And now we come to the last productivity hack that Mark discusses in his video. Quite simply, more is not always better. Just spending more time on something doesn't always mean you get better results. We need breaks. Our minds can't keep going on and keep being productive. It just doesn't work that way. If you were doing something repetitive, like packing things in boxes, then yes, the longer you do it, the more you are likely to do. But are you likely to even do that well for hours and hours and hours with no break? I doubt it. So if we want to see results, we make sure we take breaks and don't work ourselves into the ground. In fact, Mark says that working very long hours could actually produce the exact opposite result to the one you want. The example he gives is that if he spends 4 or 5 hours writing a couple of scripts for his YouTube videos, great. But if he stays there, to write another one and that could take another few hours, and then we start to get tired, and then he wants to write another one. He's mentally exhausted. 12 hours later, he's done. And when he reads that fourth script, it's useless rubbish. He goes on to say that even if you're not making mistakes, you are most likely miserable working for too long, which in turn affects your emotions, and it's a pretty grim situation all round. And it's this sort of attitude to productivity which often leads to burnout. So remember, work, yes, for a specific period of time, and then take that break. We all need it. There's no weakness to that. In fact, the breaks will make us even more productive. So just to recap the 5 productivity principles from Mark Manson. Number 1, work with your biology, not against it. Number 2, the minimal viable action. Number 3, you only improve what you measure. Number 4, don't fight your emotions, leverage them. And number 5, more is not always better. And there you have it. Do check out his channel on YouTube. I think it's great. Just type in Mark Manson and you'll find him. And that brings us to the end of this week's episode, friends. So I hope that you have found a few nuggets in Mark's wisdom. And don't forget to join me next week for another productivity episode. But until then, you take care of your wee self.